What, William, an extraordinary story.
It is, at least in scale. This is certainly not the first time that authorities in Germany at the state and federal level have made raids of a variety of far-right and extremist groups, also with the potential or the desire to take down the German government, the so-called Tag X, Day X, preparing these preppers. I'm sure you have them in the UK as well, people who are kind of preparing for an end of times, an end of society as we know it. But by the scale of it, it's being called the largest raid of its kind. As you mentioned at the top, 3,000 police officers involved, I think in 11 of Germany's 16 states. The public prosecutors said something like more than 100 sites were hit at once, including abroad in Italy and Austria. So really a massive operation went down this morning in the very early hours.
A massive operation, and the character of this apparent plot, William. I mean, a German aristocrat, a prince no less, at the head of it all. The judge involved, former and serving commandos, military commandos. I mean, it is almost like the plot of a 1960s drama.
Well, Germany can sometimes come off seeming like that. And for those who have their eyes open in Germany, this will not come as any real surprise. Again, the scale of it is quite notable. But, far-right sympathies in the German military, in a variety of police organizations at the state and federal level, also in the very domestic intelligence that is tasked to protect the country and protect people against far-right sympathies. None of this is new. Also, we heard about this judge right here in the German capital, Berlin, a city that's known for its cosmopolitan, has this image of being open and tolerant and accepting of all people. A judge who was also a former parliamentarian for the far-right party, the Alternative for Germany party, arrested. So this is sort of a coming together of things that have been happening, the things we've been seeing elsewhere around Germany the last few years. I mean, only a couple of years ago, the Special Forces unit, the KSK, was almost completely disbanded because of how rife far-right sympathies were in those units. And some elements of the KSK, the Special Forces, were actually disbanded. So it's just a kind of a snowball effect as Germany, its institutions, wake up to the fact that far-right extremism is very much a clear and present danger in Germany.
I mean, I suppose it would be possible at first glance to put this in a file marked crackpots with a strange scheme to take over the government. Was it a credible threat to the system in Germany, from what you understand of it?
Well, it was credible enough for an operation of this scale to be undertaken early this morning. Marco Buschmann, the justice minister, he tweeted earlier saying, it's not so infrequent that, braggarts after a bit of alcohol will talk about fanciful stories. But in this case, it wasn't that. There was credible evidence to support and to give the Federal Court of Justice the reason and the feeling that they had to execute these arrest warrants and execute this massive operation. That said, let's not give these people more credit than they deserve.
Sure.
These are people with fanciful ideas. The German state is a strong state. The idea of a few dozen people trying to take the Bundestag, the German parliament, to try to overthrow the government and replace it with their own shadow government. That's quite a far-fetched idea. And as the Interior Minister, Nancy Faeser, said today, the investigations will uncover. We will hear more about just how far along they were in planning. Right now, it seems mostly like fanciful ideas, as we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate aim, as it's described and reported, does seem to be, as you say, very far-fetched. That's the overthrow of the German, pretty deeply established government in a liberal democracy. That would be a pretty big task. But I also read that part of this plan was to foment something like a civil war. So clearly, they had in mind to cause a great deal of harm on the way to their goal.
Yeah, in addition to these supposed attacks that were planned on government institutions, on the parliament, they were also supposed to be simultaneous attacks on utilities, on critical infrastructure that would just cause, wreak havoc, cause chaos in society, cause disquiet among people, and lead to, this ability for them to then take over and reassert some kind of authority or some kind of control. But again, Germany is a massive place. It's a federal country. It's broken down among the federal power, state, local. It would be quite, it would be quite a task to be able to do that. And Germany is intentionally structured that way,
Yes.
exactly because in its own history, as we know, it did not take many people to undo democratic government in the 1920s and the early 1930s and actually see through this kind of plot to a fascist takeover of government. So Germany today is a much more robust, much more decentralized place exactly for that reason. One of the ways it tries to protect itself from these kinds of extremist ideas.
Yeah, but I quite see that. And after all, this plot was taken down before it could do a very particular harm. I mean, anything of this kind happening in this country, William, as you can imagine, would be causing enormous uproar in the media because, well, my goodness, what a story! I mean, how big is it flying in America, in Germany?
Yeah, and well, in America too, we know from the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol that it still has reverberations to this day and sparked many investigations. And here in Germany, there was what seems to be a spontaneous storming of the parliament a couple years ago that came out of COVID protests, and those investigations are still ongoing. Where the Parliament building was significantly under protected, and a group of just what seems to be spontaneous, angry, anti-COVID and science-denying kind of protesters stormed the building, or at least got to the outside steps. This is, of course, the big news of the day. It is, of course, in all of the newspapers. But as I said, while the scale of this kind of raid is massive, it really is being called the biggest of its kind. Raids of this sort going after far-right and extremist groups, where you hear even happening in multiple states at once, does happen from time to time. In the last few years, there's been a few. And as I said, there's even been investigations into military forces, into military units, police units, also, all the way down to the state level here in Berlin, aiding and abetting far-right plots. So the German government is really trying to get a hold of the fact that far-right extremism never really went away.
So